Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders case. One of the most tragic cases in true crime history. This is episode 4. More rabbit holes. Now, I do have some shocking new information and documents from the early days of the case, including many individuals that were named that have never been discussed since, or in a very limited capacity, certainly not in anything in the mainstream. So it does seem like there's definitely enough evidence to figure out what really happened. And again, this is Mindshock. I do not claim anything is true or untrue, but it does seem that Jean Leroy Hart was either not responsible, being framed, or possibly one of several perps, either directly or indirectly involved. And we will be going over all that and more in typical Mindshock fashion with logic and reason at the forefront, unlike any other podcast out there, in what is the most comprehensive podcast on this case. If you find this podcast interesting and informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the channel. Help get awareness out in unsolved cases, cold cases, wrongful convictions, missing persons, and more. Awareness is what gets cases solved, or cases that were supposedly solved but not really solved actually solved. Also, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that bell for notifications. If you're not getting them, just like and comment on more videos. That's how the YouTube algorithm works. You could also become a member on Mindshock. Also, check out the Bruce McGuire YouTube channel. I drop a lot of podcasts there that are not on the Mindshock podcast on the main channel. Like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topological analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. So this is a comment left on one of the other Mindshock episodes by Not Sure. And I actually had a bunch of interviews with people. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes, check them out. There's a lot of information on this case and curiosities, including the cave and the supposed frame-up of Jean Leroy Hart. So, Not Sure posted this. The guy they cut off in that interview, W.R. Thompson, knows way more than he is letting on, and it's telling that he was saying he doesn't think Hart is guilty anymore.
The cave Sheriff Weaver was looking for was accidentally found by W.R. Thompson, who lived nearby. He and his brother-in-law were out squirrel hunting when they stumbled upon it. Jean Leroy Hart was not there, but evidence was. Evidence that would later be used at the Hart trial.
And we found what looked like where someone had been staying. Is what it was. There was a sack of flour. It's what really, it was in a bread sack's what it was. And we picked it up, and just curious. And we got to discussing, if maybe it was something to do with this Girl Scout deal. And we decided, we'd go up there and talk to him. And when we went back down there, that's when we found, there was pennies and glass for glasses, a case for glasses and some photos, and I see there was some newspaper there.
Now, at the time, you felt like it was pretty strong evidence.
Yes, I really did.
Now, you testified in the trial.
Yes, I did.
And at that time, you felt that Gene was...
I definitely, felt that he was, but now I don't.
In that same news segment, they mentioned he was hunting with his brother-in-law. They don't mention the brother-in-law's name, but it was a man named Johnny Colvin. Colvin testified during the pre-trial that he had picked up the photos they found at cave number 1. This is important for 2 reasons. First, those photos were used to link Hart to cave number 1, and thus the other items that were linked to the flashlight at the camp. Essentially, the OSBI's smoking gun. Second, Colvin was married to a woman named Patricia Helton. Patricia Helton just happens to be the older sister of one of Paul Smith's suspects. In fact, Paul's suspect was reported to the Locust Grove Police Department by his younger sister, Janice Helton, a day or so after the murders. Janice told law enforcement that her brother had come home the morning of the 13th covered in blood and acting very strange. Once her brother found out she was talking to law enforcement, he beat her badly, so badly that she refused to directly speak with law enforcement afterward. Her fiancé, a man named Donnie Trammell, later worked with Smith when he became sheriff of Mays County in 1981 and was relaying information on behalf of Janice. They were trying to help Smith find a car his suspects were driving the night of the murders, and according to their information, the brother and the other suspects had dumped the car into the Grand River along with other items, clothing, murder weapons, etc. One of Paul's suspects was arrested in the 1980s for exposing himself to young children, and while in prison was confronted by Smith. Smith was able to get him to admit to the murders, who told Smith various details about that night and also told Smith they had ditched the car they were driving into the Grand River, matching what Janice Helton had told law enforcement. He told Smith that he would confess if Smith would assure him that he would not receive the death penalty. Armed with this information, Smith marched into the Mays County DA's office and requested the charges be brought against his suspects, and they refused his request. He later tried to get a grand jury to indict his suspects, but that too was unsuccessful. The OSBI allegedly investigated his suspects, and they said they had cleared them. But according to info that has been leaked to Smith, one of the suspects was alibied by one of his family members who was thought to be the man's father, but it was actually his older brother, as the older brother was nearly 20 years older. The OSBI had even intercepted Janice Helton and Donnie Trammell on their way from Anadarko, Oklahoma to Pryor, Oklahoma, with one of Smith's special deputies. They were stopped by the OSBI at a toll booth and were taken by OSBI agents and questioned. After they were released, Janice and Donnie fled the state of Oklahoma together. Shortly afterward, the OSBI started claiming that Janice had made up the information she had told the Locust Grove Police Department and Smith, stating that she was just mad at her brother, which, if you believe that, is one hell of a way to get back at someone. That also goes contrary to her information matching Buddy Bristol's information. Smith, who by that point was so frustrated with the lack of interest the OSBI had in trying to investigate anything that went against their narrative, chose not to campaign for re-election, but continued his work until his recent passing in 2021. Oh, and W.R. Thompson is now rotting in prison after he hired a man to kill his wife, Colvin's sister. And guess who found the murder weapon in that case? Johnny Colvin. That guy seems to have a gift when it comes to finding evidence in murder cases. So hold on a second here. Now, I don't know if this not sure commenter is a local because they have a lot of information. But the coincidence stack just shot an extra couple miles high into the stratosphere because this is one of the biggest coincidence stacks I've ever seen. So the guy in the interview, W.R. Thompson. Okay, hold on. Let's recap this. So this guy's brother-in-law is Johnny Colvin. So his wife is Johnny Colvin's sister. So this... wow. So Thompson apparently bought the original narrative on the Idiot Box, the mainstream narrative, that Hart did it. Now he's saying he doesn't think Hart is guilty anymore, then he gets cut off in the interview. So... So Johnny Colvin, does this Colvin character have some kind of connections to law enforcement? Because my initial response here, based on how this all went down with OSBI even intercepting people at toll booths and then they're fleeing the state afterward, that just smells like corruption. Now, maybe she did make it up, but how is it matching all these other people's accounts? That's kind of weird. Because a lot of these coincidence theorist goofs, they hallucinate, oh yeah, one person made something up, completely ignoring corroborating evidence from other individuals. And what would their motive be to lie? I mean, maybe they are lying, but then what's the motive? Like, what's going on? Like, so clearly there's more going on here, regardless of what really happened. If Jean Leroy Hart really acted alone, like, what is all of this? I mean, that's the real question here. It really seems, and again, if you haven't checked out the previous episodes, I mean, somebody actually, apparently there were one or two more kids or teens who saw Jean Leroy Hart sleeping in his car drunk the night of the murders. And their inclination was that he was just a harmless drunk. Which, again, there's obviously conflicting information but a harmless drunk at that time. I mean, obviously this guy does have a history, but by this time, I mean, he just that drunk, he's just a harmless drunk by this point, no longer committing crimes. And apparently either having a heart condition or who knows what the real cause of death was. So, yeah, it just so happens that Colvin was the one who picked up the photos found at cave number 1. So Colvin himself is married to Patricia Helton. And Helton just so happens to be the older sister of one of Paul Smith's suspects. So Paul's suspect reported to the Locust Grove Police Department by his younger sister, Janice Helton, a day after the murders. Janice told law enforcement her brother had come home the morning of the 13th. So, okay. Colvin is married to Patricia Helton. So the guy who found the photos in the cave just so happens to be married to the older sister of one of Paul Smith's suspects. Now, okay, yeah, maybe siblings are mad at each other, but how often do they do they trump up charges for murder? Now, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, that happens probably, that I don't want to say frequently, but it happens a certain percentage of the time. It's not rare. But siblings reporting each other fraudulently, I mean, that's a lot more rare. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it happens, but I wouldn't jump to that as a de facto, especially when there's corroborating evidence here. I still can't get over this. I mean, this is really weird. The guy that so-called found the evidence, his wife is the older sister of one of Paul Smith's suspects. So after she was talking to law enforcement, he beat her badly, and then she didn't speak to law enforcement afterwards. So the people arguing if he beat her up frequently and she made this up to get back at him, I mean, why would she stop if she's used to getting beat up? I mean, as dark as that sounds, I mean, if that's what was used, unless somebody's claiming there was a different reason why she made this up to get back at her brother for some reason. So her fiance, Donnie Trammell, worked with Smith when he became sheriff in 81. Okay. So are they all lying? So is Smith and Janice Helton, they're all lying? And I mean, why would, I mean, this is kind of insane. Okay. Smith is sheriff. So Trammell's the one who's giving information to Smith, who became sheriff Mays County in 81, on behalf of Janice. So a different suspect, it doesn't give a name here, so there's a group of suspects, Paul Smith's suspect. One of them is the brother of Janice. Another one was arrested and was confronted by Smith in prison. Smith was able to get him to admit to the murders. So apparently there's details here that this other suspect has that supposedly, I mean, unless Smith is a complete moron, I mean, we're talking, there's certain details. Like, does Smith have a conflict of interest? So, Sheriff Weaver supposedly, so there's so much regarding Weaver, and we went over this in previous episodes, but apparently there's a massive conflict of interest because Jean Leroy Hart is somehow involved with Weaver's wife. Now, there are rumors that Weaver's current wife was actually Jean Leroy Hart's ex-wife. And I guess they resumed their relationship while she was currently married to Weaver. And also, Gene Lee, and even if that's not true, Gene Leroy Hart did escape from Sheriff Weaver's jail prior. So this is a guy who, so obviously that makes the sheriff look bad when these guys are just escaping from his jail. So there's clearly a conflict of interest in history there. But is there such with Smith? Because Smith is getting this guy, this other suspect, not Patricia Helton's younger brother, but one of the other suspects. Smith, there's some kind of information that matches up. And also corroborated that the car they were driving, they drove it into the Grand River. And this just happens to match the information. So how would he have got that information unless Patricia Helton just went around telling everybody? Supposedly she didn't, because her brother beat her up, that she never mentioned it other than to Donnie Trammell, her fiance. Now, unless Trammell's going around telling everybody, maybe he only told Smith, and now this other suspect corroborated that information and possibly other information, and possibly also has information that has never been made public. If we are to believe that Smith took him at his word, or at least the possibility that what he's telling is true, this other suspect, I mean, we have corroboration here. Just so happens. I mean, the coincidence stat quite high. Now, also, the OSBI, apparently, they cleared the suspects by taking the word of one of the family members alibying the suspects. I mean, what kind of gullible goof falls for this stuff? I mean, that's not clearing somebody because a family member said that they were with them that night. I mean, that's not clearing. Okay, so now what brought this up? Because the OSBI stops Janice Helton and Donnie Trammell. So here, okay. So apparently, it doesn't say this. If not sure can chime in here. Not sure 4878 who commented this. What's the timeline here? Because is this as soon as Smith got this information from the other suspect in prison? Because he stated here, the OSBI intercepted Janice Helton and Donnie Trammell while they were traveling with one of Smith's special deputies. So they're stopped at the OSBI. They're stopped at a toll booth by the OSBI and taken by OSBI agents and questioned. As soon as they're released, they flee the state of Oklahoma. So they were traveling with one of Smith's special. So clearly there's some kind of fix in, because, well, and I want to hear from one of Smith's special deputies. Who is this guy? I wonder if Not Sure knows his name and if he's ever gone on record regarding this specific incident and the case as a whole, because there's clearly some funny business going on here. Now he says information matching Buddy Bristol's information. Is Buddy Bristol that other suspect that Smith got the information from in jail? And what are the total amount of suspects? Because this, and you know what, the other thing, I mean, this does match the testimony of one of the Girl Scout girls who said that she saw a group of Caucasian men on the trails shortly after. So this all matches up, and none of it points to Jane Leroy Hart. Okay, so let's look at this article regarding Buddy Bristol. So this is kosu.org, your most trusted source of news and music from Oklahoma and NPR. 1977 Northeast Oklahoma Girl Scout murders case case gets fresh look in wake of McGirt ruling. Published July 6, 2023 by Allison Herrera. The horrific 77 Mays County Girl Scout murders are unforgettable for many Oklahomans. Now the case is getting a fresh look. Cherokee citizen Faith Phillips, acting on a tip, presented her findings at the Tribal Self-Governance Conference in Tulsa. Phillips is a Cherokee novelist and screenwriter living in Locust Grove. She's also got a legal background, which is how she got a tip from a former Mays County sheriff about the person who allegedly committed the gruesome murders. Quote, while he was sheriff, he obtained a confession from a man in prison named Buddy Bristol, Phillips said. Buddy Bristol said that he had gone with several others to the campsite that night, and he was there. One of the other men murdered the little girls, and the other men who he named are still living in the community today, end quote. So it was Bristol in the prison, and there were several others involved. Okay, so she recently presented the 4-part docuseries streaming online on Fox Nation at a tribal sovereignty conference in Tulsa. In the film, produced with Cherokee filmmaker Jeremy Charles, Pursuit Films, and Texas Crew Productions, she revealed new info about the case. The person who was tried and found not guilty was a Cherokee man named Gene Hart. Phillips said the FBI hasn't closed the case, but it is inactive. A fresh investigation has been reopened by Cherokee Nation law enforcement. That's due to the landmark ruling in McGirt vs. Oklahoma in 2020. One of the men, Phillips says, confessed is Native. And because the crime occurred in Locust Grove on the Cherokee Nation reservation, it's now being investigated by Cherokee marshals. I think the Cherokees traditionally had been painted as not being interested in justice in this case, Phillips said. At the time of the trial, you have to keep in mind, these poor families are grieving the sudden and tragic loss of their daughters, and there were some Cherokee activists outside of the courthouse protesting because they were convinced that Gene Hart had been railroaded by the state in the investigation, that they had focused only on him, and it was an unjust accusation, and that he wasn't guilty. Phillips recognizes this is a sensitive topic for the victims' families. While she says she doesn't want to speak for them, they've told her they're interested in the truth. Interesting. Okay, so unless she's lying, all the goofs hallucinating that somehow families, if they're so-called satisfied, that everybody else should just let it go. I mean, I never understood that level of goofery, because the victims deserve justice regardless of what anybody says, including their own family members, right? Especially children, but even adults. I mean, if a family member is convinced they got the right guy, that still doesn't mean that they did get the right guy. So, I mean, this level of goofery and hallucinating victims deserve justice only based on the whims and feelings of friends and family. I mean, this is weird. But again, you see this in the true crime community online. No shortage of goofs there. Okay, so I'm not sure what the history of land is there. So the Scott family allegedly donated Camp Scott, but who knows the delineations of that property. We went over shady neighbors and all these other things in previous episodes, so check those out if you haven't seen those. I'm just going to go over one more astute comment from a Mindshock listener, from Cynthia, on the episode 3 podcast episode on YouTube. Cynthia commented this: I find it odd that these people that describe what they think happened leave out the fact that the girls died at very different times in very different ways. None had any bodily fluids found on them. One had sticks inside her and a rope around her neck. They leave out the 2 different sized shoe prints and multiple fingerprints found in the tent, on the flashlight, on a crowbar found, and on the bodies themselves. And let's not forget that female DNA was swept under the rug. The first rape, Kathy never mentioned Hart making a sound, and I'm pretty sure when she walked in on the lounge that night with a bottle of vodka, she did not inform anyone that she was 4 months pregnant. Carla heard a sound coming from the direction of the back fence, which opens into private property. Open pasture. If she shined her light that way, there were no trees to block her view. Also, the back gate was right by her tent, also near where the girls were found. It's odd she was so close to all the activity at the back gate, but didn't see or hear anything. Carla was awake at 1:30 when a man was seen and heard at the latrine talking loudly to another man. Carla went out of her tent towards the latrine to retrieve screaming girls, but did not check tents like she was supposed to. One of the men who were ID'd by a photo lineup to be Bill Stevens by a camper that's seen him on the trail. Celia Stahl leaves out that this finding of the girl who was also around 1:30. So we have men seen in her unit, Qualpau, a child crying in the woods that she finds, but she doesn't know who the girl is or where she was taken back to. Men at the latrine talking, and a man in Kiowa looking intense, all around 1:30. That's interesting. Gene Leroy Hart went to prison in 66. He was definitely not in the area of the camp again until 74. Many have said that he had hundreds of relatives, so I highly doubt he was living in those woods or stealing from children. So obviously we don't know what he was or wasn't doing, so let's take away that last comment. But is this a local? Cynthia posted this, seemingly having a lot of knowledge of exactly where Carla was. So that back gate, if opened, anybody could access through there? Yeah, this is all really weird. And then there's multiple accounts of these Caucasian men walking around and checking in tents. That is a curiosity, is it not? I mean, very on-point post here. So is it possible? So again, based on what was going on here, is this some kind of weird occult ritual? I mean, was this shades of Johnny Gosh before Johnny Gosh, where, I mean, there's just occult things happening in that area? I mean, how many Girl or Boy Scouts were victims of some kind of abuse and then, of course, overlapping occult activity that is swept under the rug under the guise of satanic panic, just to be dismissed, and all the gullible goofs that buy into just dismissing any and all satanic ritual abuse by thinking it's all nonsense because they're too mentally weak to consider the possibilities. And unfortunately, many victims do not get justice because of these mentally weak goofs and coincidence theorists who just can't fathom that evil does exist in the world. Okay, so yeah, I mean that is very curious. There's multiple different shoe prints, multiple fingerprints, female DNA. Is it possible Carla and or Celia were possibly coerced to be involved against their own will? Is it possible they or some of the other counselors, maybe, if they had gone to the camp earlier, were they abused in some capacity? Were they part of some kind of conspiracy of silence, so to speak, where they weren't necessarily going to blow the whistle on anything? They were too scared if they knew who was really involved? Or is this simply a case of perhaps drunk boyfriends who convince one of their girlfriends to let them into the camp to, who knows, steal stuff maybe, and they had no clue they would do anything this depraved or despicable or evil. They thought maybe they would just steal a couple things or play some pranks. I mean, how many female counselors have allowed boyfriends or friends to do this at camp? Like innocent type pranks, I mean, nothing sinister. That wouldn't be surprising if they would have assisted under the guise of that. And is it possible that some of these guys, they also didn't know that? There was one psycho among them that just kind of did this, and then they didn't know what to do, and they were too scared to kind of blow the whistle on him because it implicates themselves because they helped him get into the camp, even if they didn't really know what he was going to do. I mean, a lot of possibilities here, and plenty more to come. I'm actually double-checking quite a bit more bombshells in this case, so I do have a couple more episodes coming, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, all the listeners out there, leave your thoughts, theories, comments, suggestions, rebuttals, or debunkings of any kind in the comment section. Hope everybody found another edition of the Mindshock podcast interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.